Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is former Senator and founding member of our Republican legacy, John Danforth. Senator, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, especially at this critical time. We are less than a week away from Election Day. The polls are showing a historically tight race between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. What are your thoughts on seeing data of a race this close, just days away from November 5th?
Well, I don't know that anybody can predict what's going to happen. Everybody says it's going to be close, although I've heard some outliers say maybe it won't be so close. So I don't know. My own hope is it's decisive, that there's no question about the result. Now, it's likely that whatever the result, people will question it, but my hope is that it is decisive, and that for reasonable people, there's no real question as to who won it.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I think I know the answer based on what you just said, but does it concern you at all that the former president has now for months been laying the groundwork of potentially challenging the election results if it doesn't really go in his favor?
It's predictable. This is what he does, I mean, there was absolutely no question in 2020 that he'd lost. He had lost. It was clear. And he claimed that he won, and he's got, tens of millions of supporters who believe in him. And so they say, well, okay, then it was stolen. But it's not true. And no, I think that, that he's already done this before, claimed that elections were stolen, and if he loses this time, I'm pretty confident that he will do it again, and that he will incite violence. So that's the nature of Donald Trump.
Do you think there's going to be potentially, if he loses, another January 6th type event then?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's happened in my party, the Republican Party, is that it's become pretty much of a personality cult. And so people view Donald Trump as their champion, and I understand that. But it's gotten to the point where they not only view him as their champion, but they view him as somebody who can't go wrong. And so whatever he says goes, as far as they're concerned. So if he claims that he was cheated or that the election was stolen, there are a lot of people who then believe that the election was stolen. And it's a very short step from that belief to the sort of thing that happened on January 6th. So do I think that there is a potential for violence again this time? Yeah, I think that there is, depending on the outcome.
In this election, as we are gearing up to Election Day, Democrats and some Republicans have called Donald Trump a threat to democracy. Some Republicans say, hey, that's hyperbolic, that statement's a little overblown. What do you think?
Well, I think the obligation of anybody in public life, and in fact the obligation of all citizens, is to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Anybody who has ever held a public job takes an oath to do just that, support and defend the Constitution. Every member of the bar, lawyers, take that same oath. But I think that even without taking that oath, it's kind of understood as a responsibility of citizenship that we support and defend the Constitution. And an attack on the legitimacy of elections, an unfounded attack on the legitimacy of elections, is an attack on the Constitution. It's an attack on the peaceful transfer of power, the legitimacy of a presidency, the legitimacy of court decisions where there has been litigation on the subject. So it really does violence to the Constitution and to the country. The Declaration of Independence says that our country is derived from the consent of the people. Well, when you undermine the consent of the people, you do real damage to the country and the Constitution. So I think that back in 2020, Trump did real damage to America. And in my mind, nobody has done more damage to the country, because he's riled up tens of thousands of people who think that our system is wrong and that the peaceful transfer of power should not occur. And if he does that again after the next election, I guess it depends on who wins, but if he does it again after the next election, he has doubled the amount of damage that he's caused.
That's a big statement. No person you think has done more damage to the country than Donald Trump. So from the lens of looking at the Constitution, trying to preserve the Constitution, what is your pitch then as a Republican to other lifelong Republicans when it comes to this election?
Well, I just personally, I've never supported Donald Trump, and I won't now. I've not gone so far as to endorse his opponent because I am a Republican. And to me, it was a terrible choice in this election. But I believe that no matter what happens in the election, we, the people, have to stand for our country and for our Constitution and for truth, and not for what we hope would be the result of an election, but we have to stand for truth. And when we say defend the Constitution, well, let's defend it, and we better be ready to do it.
Another lifelong Republican, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, she took that a step further, is endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris, has been on different campaign stops with her. Do you think that moves the needle at all? What do you think of that? Because you're saying, hey, I'm not endorsing a Democrat, but I'm not standing with this Republican.
Well, along with a number of other people who have been lifelong Republicans and served in various Republican offices, we started an organization last spring, and the name of the organization is Our Republican Legacy. And the reason for the organization is to keep alive the traditional principles of the Republican Party. And they include respect for the Constitution and the rule of law, as well as a strong national defense and reliable alliances and fiscal responsibility and so on, to just focus on those principles, not on individuals, not on particular campaigns, but on those principles. But the belief is that the country deserves a responsible conservative party. And historically, that has been the Republican Party. We have been responsible, we have been conservative. But the MAGA iteration of the party is not just different from that, it's the opposite of that. So we want to keep the flame burning, keep the ember burning of what the Republican Party has been and the great contribution that it's made to our country historically. We want to revive that. We want to bring it back. And so in order to do that, in my view, my best contribution I can make is not to endorse Harris, but to just reiterate what I believe. I am a Republican. I believe in the Republican Party. I don't agree with the direction that Harris would lead the country. But I also believe that the principles that have defined the Republican Party and been unanimously agreed to by Republicans for many decades and now been thrown overboard, those principles have to be kept alive, and that the vehicle for keeping them alive is the Republican Party.
So, to your point, how do you keep them alive? Because clearly something happened where a good portion of this party, a good portion of its base decided to go the MAGA route. So how do you bring them back?
Well, I think what's happened is the focus has been on a personality, and the refocus has to be on principles. So we've enumerated 5 principles. One is respect for the rule of law and the Constitution. One is the principle of trying to hold the country together. That was Abraham Lincoln's effort, that we have one country, and the politics of divisiveness and appealing to the sense of grievance and rage is just destructive. Another one is fiscal responsibility. The national debt increased 40% in 4 years in the time of Donald Trump. Another one is the primacy of the private sector in the growth of America rather than excessive government intervention through high protective tariffs and through price controls. And finally, peace through strength, which is a national defense that's second to none, and also reliable alliances, which includes NATO, and which includes support for Ukraine, and which includes resistance to the designs of Vladimir Putin. So our view is focus on those principles and set them out, and essentially ask people, Republicans in particular, do you believe in these principles or don't you? I mean, do you believe in reliable alliances? Do you believe we have to resist Putin? Do you believe in fiscal responsibility? Do you believe in the rule of law or not? And if you don't, fine, say so. But I think when we focus on these principles, many, many Republicans will say, yes, let's get back to those principles, and turn away from the direction that we've taken in the last 7 or 8 years, which is a reversal of those principles.
So let's talk about the future of the GOP then, because right now it seems to be at a crossroads with Trump up potentially for a second term, a consequential election just days away. So what is the future of the Republican Party, and how drastically does that future change should Trump win or should he lose?
Well, the basic position of our organization, called Our Republican Legacy, is to take the long view and not just to focus on this election and what's going to happen in this election, what's going to happen after this election. So I think there are 2 possibilities. If Trump loses, then that has to be a blow to the Republican Party as a personality cult. He will be now twice defeated for the presidency, and I think that would take a lot of wind out of the sails of Trump and Trumpism. But let's suppose he wins. Then I think in the case he wins, several things will happen. First, he'll be a lame duck, which tends to weaken a presidency. Second, there'll be a lot of opposition to him that will build up, so his negatives will build up. And then I just think that that people are going to get tired of him. There's just a fatigue factor with Trump. So yeah, I think people are going to be looking for, how do we define the Republican Party at a time when Trump becomes less and less of a factor. And when we think about that, and we think about basic principles, that is when I think the Republican Party will be restored and in line with its really great tradition.
That's definitely a long-term look, but in the short term, Election Day is just 5 days away as we sit here and chit-chat right now. What are you looking out for on Tuesday night?
I don't know. I can't predict. I just don't know what to expect. But what I am looking forward to is beyond Tuesday night. and the belief that, you know, we've been going as a country for, well over 2.5 centuries, and we've been through a lot, and we've been through a lot of political upheaval. Even in our early days, the election between Jefferson and Adams was terribly divisive and bitter. And then there was, the early 19th century when there was talk about New England seceding from the Union. Can you imagine that? And then there was slavery and the Civil War, and my part of the country, bleeding Kansas, and the border wars between the Missouri ruffians and the Kansans, and those were terrible, terrible times, and we came through them. We survived as a nation, and that's going to happen again. This too shall pass. America is bigger than any election. It's bigger than any individual, for sure, and it's strong and it's resilient, and it's made up of just so many really good people who love their country and are committed to their country. And they don't want us to be just torn apart and divided, and families divided. The Thanksgiving dinner thing where people won't speak to Uncle Joe because of, his position on the election and all that. Friendships are broken up. People want to get beyond that. They want to get on with their lives. They have good lives, decent lives, decent people, good friendships, good families, and a great country, and they want to get on with it. So I think that, the election will come, the election will go, and America will survive, and America will thrive.
You think that the American experiment will live beyond this time? So when you hear Democrats and when you hear other people say Trump is a threat to democracy, democracy is hanging by the balance in the United States, it's hanging on by a thread, you think that's a little overblown?
Yeah, I do. Yes, I do. I think. And this is the way it's painted, really, by both sides, and from the standpoint of the Democrats, they say this election is existential, meaning what the existence of the country depends on it. And from the Republicans, from Donald Trump and so on, says if he's defeated, we won't have a republic anymore. And then they present themselves, Trump presents himself, and other Republican candidates present themselves as the savior of America. They're not the savior. They're just people, and they blow themselves way out of proportion. It's like a cartoon, so cartoons, the illustrator of a cartoon blows things out of proportion, huge ears, huge noses, whatever. And that's what politicians are doing. They're blowing themselves into cartoon characters. And America is bigger than that, and America is sounder than that.
So November 6th and beyond, America will still be standing, according to you, Senator John Danforth. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate this conversation. It's very refreshing, and you are welcome back anytime. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.